The question that men are having now, the 18, 19-year-old broccoli heads of the world, they're saying, hey, what do I get in return for getting to this point where I've got a 200K salary?
There was at least an attempt to lie to us about what the future and our prospects were, right? There was still an attempt to tell us, hey, just go to college, get your degree, you'll go get a good job, you'll get married, by the time you're 24, you'll have some kids, you'll afford a house, and you'll live in a safe neighborhood. There was an attempt to lie to us. Even back then, I don't think it was true, but they at least tried. Whereas the Gen Z people, you can't even lie to them because it's so obviously not true.
I go to school that next day, literally I go to class and I'm like, yeah, did you hear that thing that he said last night about Rosie O'Donnell? That was hilarious. Everyone looks at me like, that was offensive. That was incredibly offensive to women. Rosie O'Donnell is now getting death threats on Twitter. This is that and the other. I am now a product I am an unpaid operative for the DNC.
And that's sort of being replaced by the more traditional masculine thing of hey, have your fun as a teenager. But by the time you get to a certain age, you're expected to grow out of these things. You're expected to engage with the world in a more serious way, see problems for what they are, and then try to solve them. I really know very few men today that still identify as liberal. Whereas 10 years ago, I think every single one of my friends would have said they were liberal in some way, right? At least sort of leaned towards liberal. But today, man, every single one of them would say they're conservative, right? And very few are still willing to even call themselves liberal. Some may say centrists, right? Even to just avoid identifying with that. So, I think the question I want to start off to you, right, is why exactly is this happening? You sort of alluded to it a little bit when you were talking about the nuclear family and marriage and how this is all being destroyed. But what's your breakdown? What's your analysis of why exactly this is happening?
And I'm going to do something that's not very in my character. I'm going to go top down with this.
Nice.
So women, okay, women right now are in a position where they've never been before. They're in a position of power, okay? Women have equal power to men, if not more in some cases. We'll get into that later. But so they are able to, because of this new power that they have. And by the way, when I say new, I'm talking about the last 65 years, right? They've been slowly forced into a situation of they have to have a career. And this is because post-World War II, right? So post-World War II, they have to have a career. And that's due to redacted. You can do your own research on that and why. But so now that's an expectation that a woman has a career, okay? Whether that's good or bad, don't worry. I'm not making a claim on that. I'm saying that's a fact. So now that women have to have careers, that means that they have money. Okay, so if they have money and stability, what do they need you for? That's what I'm asking, right? Yep. So they view this whole now I've got power in the situation where I can now vet men to be not only they have a career, but they have to have a bunch of other traits, which we've discussed episode 3 and 4. The bar is going up as far as hypergamy goes. Where am I going with this? It's a good question. So now that women have this situation where they have higher standards for men, they're saying, hey, you know what? I don't actually need to, I want you to have a $200,000 income, 6'2", make me laugh, etc. Totally fine, have your standards, I get that. But the question that men are having now, the 18, 19-year-old broccoli heads of the world, they're saying, hey, what do I get in return for getting to this point where I've got a 200K salary? I've worked my ass off for 15 years to figure this shit out. I've signed all my prenuptial agreements. I've gotten all my stuff locked away in in trust so that you can't take it from me when we get divorced. Not if, but when. So that's what's going on. Is the men are adapting to, the boys are adapting to, if you will, what the current state of the hypergamy is. So that's my view on what really is causing the shift. Because I know that's not political, but that's socio-political, and that leads into women in general. And I talked about this last week. They're more inclined to be falling for the propaganda that is empathy, right? And that's why a lot of women are pro-immigration. Immigration is objectively a bad thing at certain numbers, right? It's good for some things, but objectively, if you look at the metrics, it's bad for a lot of numbers. However, if you have an immigrant in front of your face, knock on your door, and you say and they say, oh, I'm injured, I'm sick, whatever, it's going to be hard for you to say, well, technically the numbers are going to specify that you shouldn't come into I don't think you should be here. I can't, but you're going to help them, right? It's in your human nature to say, come on in, let's get you a meal, let's get you warmed up. You want to take them in, right? Problem is you can't take 6 million of them in, right? You can't do that feasibly.
Right.
But that propaganda works more on women than it works on men because they're more prone to that stuff, and then that's whatever. And that's
Yeah.
my opinion, and also that's
Yeah.
backed up with research. But you can do your own, and you can disagree with me. Put it in the comments if you disagree. And again, I'm going top down, but it's now become bottom up. So let me finish that out with this. It's not about politics. It's about sociopolitics, and that's why I think the men are saying, "Well, I'm MGTOWing. I mean, at this point, why would I even capitulate to that?" Therefore, they're not. They don't have to have these fake beliefs. Whereas, from
Yeah.
1990s to the 2010s, you had to have this fake of, "Oh, let me match the belief of the woman so I can kind of sleep with her and get with her, etc." And then you become the caricature of what you faked since day one, and now you're a quote unquote liberal, right? That's how men have become liberals.
Right.
That's my view. That's
Right.
kind of where I'm going with it. So that's my explanation. That is the
Yeah.
absolute state of what's going on in my mind. So kicking it over to you.
Great. Yeah. Perfect top down. I mean, I don't even feel necessary on this podcast anymore. You nailed the top down.
But you go bottom up. I mean, if
perfectly.
you want to. But yeah.
No, I cannot. I don't even know how to do that. It's a foreign language to me. But what I'm going to do is go top down from a different angle.
Different
so, I mean, I completely agree with everything you just said, but I'm going to add something else to it, basically, which is the cultural shift. Because of everything you just said, young men are much more likely to have these rational reactions to it. As you said, women are more going to lean on their empathy and their emotions and what feels good and what they think they should be thinking and doing, whereas men are just going to deal with the world as it is. And so that's like what you're seeing is a return of the masculine spirit as the driver of what's not only cool, like good, but cool, right? So it is cool to be a man. Like if you think of like what is cool, like it's somebody who, like I think of somebody when I think of cool, like somebody comes to my mind, right? Is like Tyler Durden, right? He's a caricature of cool, right? That's the whole point of that movie is that it's like this dude's subconscious desire to be extremely good looking and extremely capable and extremely motivated and driven. Like Tyler Durden is the masculine ideal, but as a microcosm of the late 1990s when he was created, right? So I think we're getting back to the point where we recognize that that's what cool is. During the mid 2000s to like maybe let's say about, I don't know, 3 to 4 years ago, cool was like, and I'm not being racist, I'm just explaining. Cool was like black culture, right? Like hip hop, and aside from black culture, you also had like the feminist movement and like sexual degeneracy and like getting laid and getting on Tinder and going to the clubs and going to bars, right? And like this is always something that young people have enjoyed, like going out and partying. But it went from something that's like, hey, this is sort of a youthful thing that we enjoy, to like, if you're not doing this, you're no longer part of the culture. You're no longer cool or interesting or any part of anybody wants to be around. And that's sort of being replaced by the more traditional masculine thing of like, hey, have your fun as a teenager. But by the time you get to a certain age, you're expected to grow out of these things. You're expected to engage with the world in a more serious way, see problems for what they are, and then try to solve them. So young men are seeing that. And I think the reason they're sort of forced into this sooner is because the problems are so much more severe than the ones, let's say, Tony and I had to deal with. I mean, we're still dealing with them too. We live in the same world. But like, let's say like when you and I were like 12 or 13, there was still there was at least an attempt to lie to us about what the future and our prospects were, right? There was still an attempt to like tell us, hey, just go to college, get your degree, you'll go get a good job, you'll get married, by the time you're 24, you'll have some kids and you'll afford a house, and you'll live in a safe neighborhood. There was an attempt to lie to us. Even back then, I don't think it was true, but they at least tried. Whereas the Gen Z people, you can't even lie to them because it's so obviously not true, right? Like if you're coming out of college right now, it's the prospects are so bleak, right? I mean, on the job front, on the economic front, it's just so trash. And so we live in this world of the liberal ideology has done its damage, and it's no longer possible to deny it. And it's very obvious now that if you still adhere to this liberal ideology, that you're just somebody who's not plugged in. You're just somebody who's not really thinking at a high level. You're somebody that just sort of swallows the propaganda, and that's lame now, right? That's very lame, and maybe I think it's always been lame, but it just so happens that this is like the side of the aisle that it affects now. So, long story short, there, it's now much cooler and much more plugged in to just be a conservative, because we're the ones now who are the counter revolution, like the countercultural movement, right? We're the ones who are like, hey, we're still a minority. I mean, those stats I just read you, like the conservative movement is still a minority, but we're growing specifically because we have that cultural edge. And it may sound kind of dumb that I'm saying, oh, we're cool now, so that's why we're winning. I'm sorry, but that's the way things are. Like politics matters. Like your image is what matters. If you like think of Obama. Obama was cool, right? That's why he was so popular. That's why he won. That's why the youth loved him. That's the situation we're in now. It's just switch sides, and yeah, I think that's the main thing. So I mean, more I could say about that, and I will, but I'll let you take over since I spoke for a little bit there. But yeah, what do you think about that? I mean, I think both of our points sort of fit together, but I'm taking it from a much even more top down. I had to go higher than you because you stole my top down.
No, and I think that's a great top-down explanation. I did steal yours, but to be honest with you, like, there's only really one way to explain this, and that is from the top. Thinking about explaining this from the bottom, it's just too hard of a concept to explain from the bottom, right? You got to go into this. You got to go into, in 1962, whatever, the No-Fault Divorce Act was put into play, and then you go down this, that, and the other. I could do it. I could do all that, but that's not the best way to message this, right? And that's one thing I've learned from you is that if you message something in a good way, that's going to be heard better, right? And just because you're factual and you do details and do due diligence does not mean that the person on the other side of things is going to hear that out. And this is related to the culture shift in a lot of ways because, yeah, you mentioned Obama. Obama's messaging was perfect for the time, right? He was catering to people who kind of where they were fed up with Bush, they were fed up with the fake lies and stuff, and he got a lot of people to kind of get active with politics. But he also took advantage of a lot of technology at the time. And that was, hey, how do we get people online to kind of talk about politics too? So that's a big thing he did. But no, I mean nowadays it's more like, ask yourself this: if you're in the audience and you're in your 30s or late 20s, what would an 18-year-old or 21-year-old man or whatever, what does he have to gain from pretending to be, pretending to care about abortion or pretending to care about immigration in an empathetic way,
right,
or pretending to care about same-sex marriage, or pretending to care about Ukraine, or pretending to care about Israel, right? Like, why would he benefit from that at all? If he's already checking out of society, and we have numbers to back this up, Gen Z is it's the least sexually active group of any generation, but they're the most outwardly discussing the sexual degeneration of any. So it's like they're the most sexually dysfunctional group of people, right? So they're already checking out of that world. So it's almost a nihilistic viewpoint, but what do you really gain when you're just, instead of consuming that kind of content, you're more of a Sigma male grind set, chain view, TikTok slop kind of, you're, something's wrong with them, with the way they're being forced a lot of information. So I don't know. To me, it's like, I've seen a lot of Gen Z kids who are just outwardly saying they're pro-Trump. And, 8 years ago, there was like literally one moment in time I remember specifically, which was, I'm at university and might have been 9 years ago at this point. Trump was like, everyone said, hey, Trump is awesome. This is great. Even Oprah was like, yo, I love Trump and everything. This is great. You're running. That's awesome. And then, he went on the View, and they were all really nice to him and stuff. And then, a couple months later, he made a comment about Rosie O'Donnell in a funny way, in my mind. Really a good way to handle a shit test. Yeah. And, hey, I'm talking to people at school saying, that's interesting. Trump's running. That's interesting, And then that night, I feel like everyone just was plugged in and turned on. And, they have chips in their brain already, and this is my schizo thought going, but it's like somebody programmed everybody, except me or whatever, to say, hey, we are now against Trump. I go to school that next day, literally, I go to class, and I'm like, yeah, did you hear that thing that he said last night about Rosie O'Donnell? That was hilarious. Everyone looks at me like, that was offensive. That was incredibly offensive to women. Rosie O'Donnell is now getting death threats on Twitter. This is that and the other. I am now a product. I am an unpaid operative for the DNC. So it's kind of like that was what was happening, and I saw that in real time. I'm like, well, I don't love Trump, but I thought he was funny. I'm not gonna capitulate to your.
He's undeniably funny.
Yeah,
for sure.
But there was that level of social pressure that was like pushing me to be, hey, I can't talk about Trump now at all because my friends, which really were just, some were friends, but most were just classmates that I had to cooperate with for like projects and stuff. I couldn't talk about Trump at all because they would just view me negatively, and that could affect work. So that's when you start. I bet you could point out to a moment in your life when that maybe happened too. But that's my point. Is now there's not that social pressure. It's almost that's the opposite way. It's almost like you have to really justify your belief that Biden is has dementia. You see what I'm saying? Like we've gaslit people so much that We're at that point where you're like, hang on a minute. You're telling me that you can't, you don't have to consent. Wait, you don't have to inform me that you're going to give my daughter puberty blockers?
Right. It's insane.
Hang on a minute. That's my kids, though. Hang on a minute. You see what I'm saying? So now you're like, wait a minute. I'm not the crazy one. You're the crazy one, as Andrew Schulz would say. So it's like, and that's why I got the mustache. But yeah, that's answering your question a little bit with overkill. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
No, I'm glad you did that. I mean, it made me want to zoom out even more. Like, I think what happens is you have, and I think maybe we're going to experience this cycle forever, right? You have a party or an ideology that takes power, right? It's this back and forth throughout history, where the liberal. So we had the Bush, for example, the neoconservative movement took power after Clinton, and really, arguably, Clinton kind of was a neoconservative, but after that, you sort of had the super neocon, which was the Bush administration, right? This was peak neocon, and we'll never see anything like it again because the neocon movement is dead. But what you had from the neocon movement was the most cynical, ugly, warmongering, bloodthirsty, hyper-capitalist ideology that the country has ever seen, right? And arguably did more damage to the country, second only maybe to like Obama, right? And the reason that they were able to do that is because they were able to build and build and build. So you started going all the way back to like Bush 1, and then, as I said, Clinton, who were arguably neoconservatives. But they also did things that made sense for the country. Like, for example, everybody knows that Clinton was the final president who actually had a surplus in the budget, right? So not only did we have a balanced budget under a Democrat, which is unfathomable at this point in our political system, but that's what happened. So these presidents actually did things that made sense for the country, and they sort of built up sentiment, which is like, hey, we sort of like this ideology, we like where we're going. And then every presidential candidate who comes after that has to sort of be a twist on that a little bit. You know, like the Bush is the same thing, but just sort of slightly further to the right, and Gore would have been the same thing, but further to the left, right? I mean, he cared so much about climate change, for example. But Bush is the one who won, and we got, like I said, they basically took what they had, their building, their sentiment, and then ran it off the cliff, right? They went totally insane and caused everybody to hate them, right? And that's what gave rise to Obama, right? And now Obama was just very accelerated. And I think what we're going to see now with the way technology is, the way the news flows, the way these conversations happen, is these cycles will just be kind of much more abbreviated, because Obama was like the whole cycle in and of himself. Like, he took advantage of the backlash against Bush and then swung everything so far in the other direction that now the liberals can't win elections, right? I mean, arguably they won in 2020, but we could